Jaya Jaya Radha Madhava Jaya Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Jaya Girivardhari Jaya Girivardhari Yashoda Nandahana Jaya Braja Jana Ranjana Jaya Braja Jana Ranjana Jaya Jamuna Tida Chahari Jaya Kunja Bihari Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Does that start with Tene? Oh. We'll chant this one, then we're going to go back because I want to cover the 16th verse as well. We have 7 verses and 3 purports to cover today, but we're going to get it done. Atorudasrijan mayam Yoga Maheshwade Hadao Yambi Lokya Prajas Tas Trashta Meni Re Asyopasya Sorry, let's start again. Meni Re Asyopasam Yamam Atorudasrijamayam Yoga Maheshwade Hadao Yamvi Lokya Prajas Trasta Meni Re Syopasam Yamam Mataji's. Atta, then, Uruda, in many ways, Asrajat, he cast, Mayam, conjuring tricks, Yoga Maya Ishwade, the Lord of Yoga Maya, Harao, Adhadi, Yam, which, Vilokya, after seeing, Praja, the people, Trastaha, fearful, many ray, thought, asya, of this universe, upasamyamam, the dissolution. The demon, however, employed many conjuring tricks against the personality of Godhead, who is the Lord of Yogamaya. At the sight of this, the people were filled with alarm and thought that the dissolution of the universe was near. Srila Prabhupada's purport. The fighting enjoyment of the Supreme Lord with his devotee, who's been converted into a demon, appeared severe enough to bring about the dissolution of the universe. This is the greatness of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Even the wavering of his little finger appears to be a great and very dangerous movement in the eyes of the inhabitants of the universe. I only got one of the 2 verses I was supposed to get done today. They gave me 6 more today to get done. There's 2 purports in today's verses and 1 from yesterday. So I'm going to go backwards because I don't want to not honor the 16th verse of the text. But you guys don't have it, so I'm just going to read it through. And then we'll comment on that, and then we'll move forward. Tene tam ahata kshater bhagavan adi sukaraha nakampata manak kvapi srajahata eva dvipaha. Hit in this manner by the demon, O Vidur, the Lord, who had appeared as the first boar, did not feel the least quaking in any part of his body, any more than an elephant would when struck with a wreath of flowers. I'll read it again. Hit in this manner by the demon, O Vidur, the Lord, who had appeared as the first boar, did not feel the least quaking in any part of his body, any more than an elephant would when struck with a wreath of flowers. Tena itam ahata kshata. Kshata is a kshatri. It's in the vocative. He's like calling out to him. It's a name for Vidura. It means attendant. It sounds like kshatriya, but it's a different word. Kshatriya means an attendant. Comes from the root kshad, which actually means like to carve, like carving up food. It's like a servant would carve up food. Different than kshatriya, which comes from kshi, which means to injure, hurt. Kshatriyas commit violence on behalf of society. Sometimes they say kshatriya is a mixing of 2 words, kshat and trayate, which is to deliver from danger. But that's what's called a folk etymology in Sanskrit or in any language, where you, after the fact, after a word has come into usage, you invent a meaning. Like mantra, we say, is mana, atra, it delivers your mind. But that's not where mantra comes from. It comes from matri, which means advice. And so you've got the actual yoga of words, the etymology of words, and then you have a conventional, or what's called a folk etymology, where a meaning to words is applied after the fact. I'm going to move forward from here. Anyway, that's kshata. He calls Vidura that because Vidura was born a Shudra, and so he would not be referred to as a kshatriya, even though he had a royal father. His mother kind of doomed his caste. It was a pratiloma birth, and so he wouldn't have been referred to as a kshatriya. So anyway, thus having been struck, tena, by him, itam, thus, ahata, having been struck, Bhagavan, the Lord, Adi Sukara, the original boar, na kampata manak kvapi. Kva api means even where, so anywhere. Manak, even a little bit, anywhere. Na kampata, he didn't shake, he didn't feel any pain anywhere. Sraja hata iva dvipaha, like a dvipa is an elephant, and this has a great etymology. Dvipa means elephant because an elephant has dvi, 2, where you get the English word dual from, or duo. Dvi, pa, 2 ways of drinking. Pa means to drink. So an elephant has 2 ways of drinking, its mouth and its trunk, because it can also, I guess, suck up water through its trunk. So it's called dvipa, 2 drinker. Islands are also called dvipa, like Navadvip, Different. That's dvi up. That's two waters, because an island is where two waters come together and surround the island by water. So that's dvipa versus dvipa. So two drinkers, two waters. Island, elephants. Shraj means a wreath. Hata, Eva means it's a simile. So like if an elephant was struck with a wreath of flowers. So if you took a wreath of flowers. One time I was on Padayatra in Vijayawada in Andhra Pradesh, and the bull ate my dhoti. And so we knew this because we got up from Mangalarti, and I went to take bath and get dressed, and I couldn't find my dhoti, which had been drying, which created a whole problem of its own. But because we'd wash our cloth that night, we had 2 sets of cloth, we'd wash our cloth, hang it up to dry, wake up in the morning, be a fresh set of cloth. This was a step up. The Hare Krishna movement, when it first started, was insanely militant. Devotees would wear their clothes and then give them in at the end of the day, and there'd be a laundry department, and they didn't own their clothes. They'd wake up in the morning, and all the clothes would be laundered, and they'd just pick up a set of clothes. That even extended to underwear. Their kopans would also they grab a pair of kopans. And Hridayananda Maharaj told me they didn't even own toothbrushes. They had like a couple of toothbrushes. They stuck them in hydrogen peroxide and just grabbed a toothbrush. So Padayatra was austere, but not nearly as austere as the birth of the Hare Krishna movement and the incredible austerities performed by the first devotees. Anyway, so we woke up, and I could see just a little tiny saffron dhoti hanging out of the bull's mouth. I mean, you're talking like a 4-meter piece of cloth, so it's 17 feet long or something like that. And just a little tiny bit, like maybe 8-10 inches, were hanging out of his mouth. And I was freaked out just at the loss of my cloth, but then the Gopa, Sanak Sanatan, came, who protects the cows, and he said, oh no. He says this is going to kill the cow, because the bull, because it's going through all of its intestines. It's a long piece of cloth. So I said, what should we do? Should we just yank it out? So we spent a couple of hours just gradually pulling the cloth out. Every couple of minutes we yank it a little bit, 6 inches out. And the bull was going to give it up because it perceives that the thing is healed. And so we had to punch the bull in the face hard with our fists, which sounds insanely useless. But Calvary explained to me that the bull hardly feels it. Here's what I can do: 2 hands ain't on top, and nothing happening. If we slap the bull and nothing happened, it didn't even move. The bull weighed like 2,000 pounds. And so we punched the bull in the face like a strong hook. It would kind of like wake up, like, oh, you got there, and then we give up a little bit of cloth. And I mean, you guys have irons. I remember sometimes on Padayatra, some new fresh person would come along, and we would give the cows or the bulls our leaf plates when we were done eating. And they would say, no, the bull's your father. You shouldn't give it your leaf plate when you eat. That's offensive. And then Jai Vijay, the head of Padayatra, would say, I regularly stick my entire arm up the backside of this bull to clear its bowels when it's having digestive problems. Like, would you do that to your father? Like, it's like they're our father in some sense. They're our mother in some sense. Not in every sense. It's an analogy. It's a simile. It's a metaphor. But it's not meant to be taken literally. Anyway, we got the cloth out. The bull was fine. It was fantastic. Then the kids, we sent some Udiya boys who were with our Padayatra to go and buy food, and they got ripped off. So then we had to go and get the money back from the people who ripped them off because they didn't know the price for grains and hay. That turned into a fight. And then Sanak, I don't know why he did this, but he took off his karam, his wood shoe, and he cracked the person who ripped us off with his shoe. Which is just, I mean, first of all, it's assault, but also it's just, we're in their village, and it's just not a safe bet. And so then they cracked him with a lati, and he was completely concussed, and it was a whole drama. We had to get out of town quick. Anyway, I just thought of this when I read the verse, but like an elephant, Eva Dvipa Hatta Sraja, like an elephant being struck with a wreath of flowers. They don't even feel it. It doesn't even register. You can like run full speed into an elephant and it'll barely notice you exist. Like, oh, are you there? Like, oh, I didn't see you there. I was going to step on you with my foot and crush you and all of the members of your family with one footstep. So it's a striking simile. And when you see the word Eva in Sanskrit, you know you're dealing with a simile, like an elephant being struck. So, yeah, okay. So, and it didn't feel anything like an elephant had been struck. So Prabhupada's purport. As previously explained, the demon was originally a servitor of the Lord of Vaikuntha, but somehow or other he fell as a demon. His fight with the Supreme Lord was meant for his liberation. The Lord enjoyed the striking on his transcendental body, just like a fully grown-up father fighting with his child. Sometimes a father takes pleasure in having a mock fight with a small child, and similarly the Lord felt Hiranyaksha striking on his body to be like flowers offered for worship. In other words, the Lord desired to fight in order to enjoy his transcendental bliss. Therefore, he enjoyed the attack. Prabhupada here extends the simile. The simile was just indicating that the Lord did not feel the attack at all. And Prabhupada is extending that idea, and he's pulling back a little bit from the story, from this verse, which just simply says, Manak, not even a little bit did his body move when he was struck, like an elephant struck by a wreath of flowers. That doesn't indicate that the elephant's enjoying being hit by a wreath of flowers, or that he even notices it, because it has, Manak Nakampata Kvapi. Nowhere at all is there any shaking or even noticing of what's happened. And Manak means not even a little bit, not even a slight bit. So a straight read of the verse would be that there was no reaction whatsoever. And so Prabhupada, inspired by the verse, pulls back from the verse, and he's discussing the larger story. And this is useful to do, because the whole pastime was so that the Lord could enjoy some vira rasa, some heroic rasa. There's 5 major rasas and there's 7 minor rasas. Our tradition borrowed from Sanskrit dramaturgy. The Bhagavatam did this, and in our tradition noticed the Bhagavatam was doing this. But there are 9 rasas in traditional Sanskrit dramaturgy. If you study Bharatanatyam, you learn them. And those 9 rasas, 2 of them were extracted, Shanta and Shringar. 3 more were added, Dasya, Sakya, and Vatsalya. That became 5 primary rasas in our tradition. 5 ways to love Krishna. You love Krishna up as your elder, that's Dasya. You love him equal as your friend. You love him down as a parent loves a child. Or you love him equal again with a romantic twist, and that's Shringar. And so our tradition, thinking about how to love Krishna, how Krishna is loved by his devotees, specifically his devotees in Vrindavan, came up with these 5 rasas, and then the 7 original rasas, we extracted 2, it was 9, then became called Gona ratis. They became secondary rasas. One of them is Vira, and that's the one that's being enjoyed by the Lord here. Bhishma Dev had a little flavor of that also. That's why he fought so valiantly that Krishna had to break his promise and attack him with a wheel. You see that beautiful painting that was done by some BBT artists of Krishna rushing at Bhishma, and Bhishma standing there like excited about being able to fight with the Lord. And then in this, Krishna said, I won't fight. Bhishma decided he was going to fight so valiantly that Krishna was forced to fight, and Bhishma won, just like Damodar was bound by his mother and caught by his mother. Similarly, Bhishma won, and that fighting between Bhishma and Krishna is also called Vira Rasa. So the Lord wanted to enjoy Vira Rasa. Nobody's capable of engaging in Vira Rasa with the Lord, and so he brings his own servants down, and that's Jai and Vijay, and that's why they were cursed. And interestingly, if you look at the commentaries to the section where their curse is being spoken of, they're not critiqued. The four Kumars are critiqued. And it's stated specifically that the four Kumars should have gotten dasya. They should have loved Krishna as servants when they smelled the tulsi and they became inspired. They should have then become dasya bhaktas, but they stayed in Shantarasa because they had offended Jai and Vijay. And there's a verse in the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu that says if you commit a slight offense, your rasa gets lowered. If it's a great offense, it gets destroyed. If you commit a slight offense, your rasa gets lowered, and a dasya bhakta will become a shanta bhakta. So that happened to them. Also, Jai and Vijay never fell. It's described that it was an avatar of Jai and Vijay that fell, just like it was a Maya Sita. And so Sita was never touched by Ravan. Rather, it was a Maya Sita that was touched by Ravan. Similarly, Jai and Vijay didn't fall. It was their expansion that fell down. They stayed in Vaikuntha, and they even dug up, Vishwanath Chakravarti dug up a verse that said, when Bali Maharaj was fighting, then Jai and Vijay participated in the fight. But if they'd fully taken birth as demons, they wouldn't have been able to participate in the fight, and therefore, they had already taken birth as demons at that time. Therefore, their original forms must have still continued to exist in Vishnu's army, and so therefore we can understand from that verse that they were still existing in Vaikuntha. If you know the story, these are pretty ecstatic details. If you don't know the story, tough luck. I don't have time to go through the whole story. But yeah, so Prabhupada here is expanding, and he's now saying the Lord enjoyed like a father with his children, fighting and playing, and joys being struck. That's not from this verse, that's from the whole chapter, because this was orchestrated by the Lord. It was the Lord's desire to fight, and this Prabhupada telescopes out, and there's a value in telescoping out. The Bhagavatam has 14,000 or 18,000 verses, depending on how you count them, and dozens of people over centuries have been counting verses from the Bhagavatam. It says it has 18,000 verses, but there's tons of pundits who've just racked their minds and count 13,800. Some people get up to 15, 16, 17, even 18,000 verses. Regardless, it's 20 to 25 times the length of the Gita. It's a big book, hard to make sense of. But the Bhagavatam gives us a list of 10 things it covers. There are 10 subjects covered by a Mahapurana. The list is given twice, once in the 12th canto, once in the 2nd canto, right before the 3rd canto begins. The first on that list is Sarga, creation. And there's several creation stories in the 3rd canto. In the course of creation, you get the birth of Swayambhuva Manu. Manu is where you get the English word man from. And so Manu is the original human. Manu had 5 children, 3 daughters, 2 sons, Uttampad and Priyavrata, and then Prasuti, Akuti, and Devahuti. And the whole 3rd canto and 4th canto and 5th canto are the descriptions of the genealogy of Manu. And so Swayambhuva Manu here, first he had to rescue the earth so that he could create progeny somewhere. So that happened. And then this story of Varahadev and Hiranyaksha is actually 2 stories. There was a Swayambhuva Manvantar and also a Chakshusha Manvantar. There were 2 time periods where Varaha appeared. One time he was dark, one time he was light, Sveta Varaha and Nila Varaha. And those 2 stories were merged together, and elements of both are there in these stories. And so the acharyas will point out, well, this happened then, this is from that, this is from that, and they were merged together. And they're also troubleshooting the Bhagavatam because there's some problematic verses in here, and they have to deal with them, namely that they were fighting Hiranyaksha. Hiranyaksha was born from Diti, but when the earth was first rescued from the ocean, Diti hadn't been born yet, and so therefore it would have been impossible for him to have fought with Hiranyaksha. Therefore there must be 2 versions of Varaha that got merged together. And the same way we troubleshoot verses and purports, our acharyas have also been doing that for centuries and even millennia at this point. So you've got this story of Swayambhuva Manu. After we finish this story, then Devahuti marries Kardama, you get Kapil Dev, then in the next chapter you get a quick mention of Yagyu who came from Akuti, then Prasuti, And the daughters that came from Prasuti, that leads right to the Daksha Yagya. Then you got Uttanprabha, which gives you Dhruva Maharaj, and then Vena, and then Prithu Maharaj. And then you eventually get to Priyavrata, the other son. That takes you all the way through to Rishabdev, Bharat Muni, and then the residents of Jambudweep, which was mentioned in the story of Priyavrata, and that becomes the whole description of the planetary system. So there's a cadence to the Bhagavatam, and by pulling back occasionally, you kind of know where you are in the text, and you don't get lost in the text. So anyway, the Vidura is being spoken to now by Maitreya. That conversation is being recounted by Shukadev Goswami to Parikshit Maharaj, and that conversation is being recounted by Sutta Goswami to the sages at Naimisharanya, headed by Shaunaka Rishi. And so you've got three conversations going on. They pull back. We're now, Vidura is talking to Maitreya, and they're describing what's happening, and Prabhupada pulls back even further and describes the whole Leela. Then on to today's verse. You guys can look up there. Atta Urudha Asrajat. Then Urudha, with great strength, Srajat, he created Mayan illusion. Yoga Mayeshware Hadal. He created illusion for the Lord of Maya, for Hari, who takes everything away. Two names for Krishna. So he created Maya, but he made a critical error in his calculation because he created Maya for Yoga Maya Ishwar, for the Lord of Maya, Hari, who takes everything away. So obviously this was going to fail miserably. But Urudha, with like great prowess, he created Maya, who Hiranyaksha. Yam, which Vilokya, having seen Praja Trusta, the people, became fearful. Menire, and they thought, Asya Upasamyamam. They thought that the universe was being withdrawn. Samyama, this word's used in yoga literature also. When you have dharana, dhyana, and samadhi all put together, those three things, when you do them together, that's called samyama, or complete control. Samyama means complete control. It also means complete withdrawal. And so upasamyama means the time of the withdrawal of the universe was near. So they thought the universe was being destroyed because the Maya was so fierce, and we're going to hear it described right now. And then Prabhupada's purport again to this verse: the fighting and joining the Supreme Lord and his devotee, who've been converted into a demon, appeared severe enough to bring about the dissolution of the universe. This is the greatness of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Even the wavering of his little finger appears to be a great and very dangerous movement in the eyes of the inhabitants of the universe. Prabhupada here takes, because it was Hiranyaksha's creating of Maya that freaked everybody out. But because Prabhupada's pulled back and he's saying the whole thing was orchestrated by the Lord, now Hiranyaksha doesn't get the credit for creating the Maya that was disturbing everybody. It was actually originally arranged by the Lord, and so he says, this is the greatness of Krishna. So it was the greatness of Hiranyaksha, who was Urudha, Asrajat Mayam, who was great prowess creating Maya. But Prabhupada's taking the credit away from him. He's saying, no, this whole thing was orchestrated by Krishna. So even though you may be playing your part, Krishna orchestrated the play, therefore Krishna gets credit. And even the fearfulness that was created by Hiranyaksha, he doesn't get credit for it. It's Krishna's credit, and that's why he says, this is the greatness of the Supreme Lord. That's why Prabhupada breaks from the verses here, because he's thinking about the story in a very, very broad way. And forgive me for rushing, but they've saddled me with something that I never do. I never get through even like a verse in a day, what to speak of 7. But we're doing it now. Fierce wind. So you want to know what happened? Here's what happened. Here's the Maya that was created by Hiranyaksha, but ultimately Prabhupada gives credit to Krishna for it, because Krishna orchestrated the whole thing. Here's what happened. Fierce winds began to blow in all directions, spreading darkness occasioned by dust and hailstorms. Stones came in volleys from every corner, as if thrown by machine guns. This, of course, is just Prabhupada's great sense of humor and his panache. He'll throw this kind of stuff in, like when it says the spiritual world isn't illumined by sun or moon or fire, Prabhupada says, or electricity. And sometimes scholars will critique Prabhupada for breaking from a literal translation. But Prabhupada just has some panache, sometimes throw in stuff that makes it meaningful for a modern listener. In this case, he's not doing that. I read Machine Gun, so I had to go look and figure out where this was coming from. And I went all the way back to Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur and his commentary in Sanskrit to this section of the Bhagavatam, because I just wanted to see where Prabhupada was getting it from, because it just seems so wild. So it's Kshepanai. Well, the whole thing is Dirgbhya Nipetur Gravanaha Kshepanai Prahita Eva. From all directions, stones came down. They fell. It's like it was hailing stones. I was told it hailed cane toads here. So anyway, I looked it up yesterday because I knew I was going to talk about this. And it doesn't hail cane toads on the regular, but there are several reports in the last centuries, along with photography, of it hailing toads in various parts of the world. Which is like right out of a biblical prophecy. But I guess at some point, so much water is being evaporated, maybe they're tiny, and then they grow up a little bit up in the clouds, or I don't know what it is, and then it rains down and they come down. I don't know how it works, but there are reports, several over the last century, not like every year in Murwillumbah, but there are several reports of it raining toads, like right out of the Bible. So anyway, it's raining stones now from all sides. So, and then Kshepanai Prahita Eva. It's another simile. As if thrown, as if flung, Kshepanai, by a sling. By a sling. A sling was throwing the stones. Kshepana means like either something that is thrown or some instrument that throws things. Then Vishwanath said, Kshepanai yantrai. When it says Kshepanai in the Bhagavatam verse, what it means is yantrai, as if by a machine. Yantra means machine. Yantrai means by a machine. It's a proper translation. By a machine gun is a totally loyal translation in our parampara of this verse, because it says by a machine thrower of things. And then the thrower of things is a gun by a machine gun. Now we think machine gun like ta-ta-ta-ta-ta-ta-ta-ta-ta-ta, like that. Prabhupada may not have meant that. He may not have meant that. He may have meant by a mechanical contraption like a catapult for throwing stones. But there were many of them from all sides, so even the straight machine gun analogy works as well. The luminaries in outer space disappeared due to the skies being covered with masses of clouds, which were accompanied by lightning and thunder. The sky rained pus, hair, blood, stool, urine, and bones. Asakrit, not once, many times. And so this just sounds insane, but this is like a fairly typical bad omen in our scriptures. Like when bad stuff happens, jackals vomit blood, and there's other stuff that happens too. We're not even done yet. We're just entering into the description of bad stuff that happens. When Hiranyaksha and Hiranyakashipu took birth, same thing happened. O sinless Vidura, Anaga, mountains discharged weapons of various kinds, and naked demonesses armed with tridents appeared with their hair hanging loose. So this is just kind of more like banshees were out there naked with loose hair. Loose hair is like a super no-no in Vedic culture for all of you wearing loose hair. It's a super no-no. I mean, you don't have to don't worry about it now, but just in the future, if you're ever in a super formal Hare Krishna event, put your hair in the braid. If you don't want someone to think of a verse like this. It's funny because if you go to South India, the Choli is from the Chola dynasty, like the Chola kingdom. Women in South India never wore cholis. So if you go to South India today, and you go out in the villages of South India today, you will see women wearing a sari, a single piece of cloth, with their breasts hanging out the side of their cloth. They don't even like wrap it super expertly. It's wrapped. Their chest is covered, but not like they're wrapping it around like a Bharatanatyam dancer or something like that. You could, if you look, you could, not like I've looked, but I'm just saying, Hare Krishna. It was a good brahmachari. But it's like they're not hiding their breasts. And so in certain cultures, certain things are considered to be erogenous zones, like the pit of your arm or the nape of your neck, and then sometimes it's the breast, sometimes it's not, sometimes it's the uncovered legs. So for whatever reason, despite the fact that covering your breast wasn't an absolute necessity everywhere in ancient India, binding up your hair was. And so it was considered to be a big deal. We don't take this super seriously because we've never had this conversation before. But if you're in a formal situation, you might want to do this. I'm not saying you have to. I'm just reading the verse and commentating on it. But full nakedness was considered to be very obscene. And so naked demonesses with their hair out and tridents. You know, like you figure if you have a naked demoness with a trident, you don't have to mention that her hair's out. But somehow or other it was a large enough factor that was like warranted, along with wielding tridents and being demonesses, they had to mention, oh yeah, and their hair was undone too. Yashoda Mai's hair also came undone. When she was trying to bind Krishna up, her hair became undone. And that was seen as like a manifestation. She was perspiring, her sari became loosened, and her hair became undone. So very beautiful. If you're like into Vatsalya, Rasa, that description of Yashoda is worth studying. Prabhupada even mentions that in his purport. But it's also mentioned her hair became undone. Because it's just showing how hard she was working. Because normally, as soon as your hair became undone, you'd tie it back up again. But she didn't because she was trying so hard to bind Krishna out of love. Cruel and savage slogans were uttered by hosts of ruffian yakshas and rakshasas. Prabhupada has such a way with words. Cruel and savage slogans. The Sanskrit is himsra vachaha. Ativa himsra vachaha. Himsra means like cruel as an adjective. So like ahimsa, himsra becomes an adjective. Cruel vacha, words. Ativa, like very cruel words. But Prabhupada, if you just listen, cruel and savage slogans were uttered by hosts of ruffians. And Prabhupada uses this kind of language, wranglers, ruffians, nonsense. He had like a real, it was quite archaic. It was like the way your grandfather might speak, but it was unbelievably articulate. He was unbelievably well-spoken in the English language. And it was a real way with words. Cruel and savage slogans were uttered by hosts of ruffian yakshas and rakshasas who all either marched on foot or rode on horses, elephants, or chariots. The Lord, the personal enjoyer of all sacrifices, now discharged his beloved Sudarshan, which was capable of dispersing the magical forces displayed by the demon. This is the last verse. Praduskritanam mayanam asurim vinashayat. Vishwanath Chakravarti notices there's 3 variant readings of this vinashayat in different manuscripts that he'd studied. And so in his commentary he mentions that there's 3 different readings. I just wanted to give you guys a sense of how meticulous our tradition is. Hundreds of years ago, they would consult different manuscripts. They would consult different commentaries from hundreds of years prior to that, and they would note variant readings, and they would note problematic words, and they would give you a gloss of those problems. Like in the previous verse, that word asya upasamyamam, that the destruction was near of this. Asya means of this. But it would mean the destruction of Hiranyaksha or of Varaha. And so they were careful. No, asya means of the universe. Asya vishvasya. Asya means of the universe. And so when you study the text, you have to consult the commentaries because there's poetic language and unclear language in the actual verse, and you require a commentary to make sense out of it. And so he notices 3 variant readings of this, but this praduskritana mayanam asuranam vinashayet. the illusion, the demoniac illusion of the evildoers. Bhagavan prayunkta daitam sudarshana astram. The Lord used his beloved Sudarshan weapon, and that thereby destroyed, vinashayat. He destroyed all the Maya, all the illusion. That's why it was a mistake. That's why it was foreshadowing. When it said he uses this great Maya against the Lord of Maya, who takes everything away, it was foreshadowing so that when this verse came along, you would understand that he made a fundamental error. It's like if you go into if you decide you want to fight somebody, and they are a world-class boxer, and you decide to box with them. You've made a critical error in judgment. You could wrestle with them. You could break out a weapon. You could kick them. But if you choose to go and box with them, and that's their speciality, of course, everything is Krishna's speciality, but particularly being the Lord of Maya is his standard feature. And so to try and use Maya against the Lord of Maya never works. And so then it was all vinashayat. It was all destroyed by the Lord with his Sudarshan. And prayunkta means he employed, and it comes from the Sanskrit root yuj, which is actually where you get the word yoga from. And so he employed his Sudarshan disc, and he's Tripat. The Lord, the personal enjoyer of all sacrifices, now discharged his beloved Sudarshan, which is capable of dispersing the magical forces displayed by the demon. And the Lord here is called Tripat. So the spiritual world is sometimes called Tripad, the three quadrants. But the Lord here is called Tripat. And so you'll see here, Prabhupada's purport. Even famous yogis and demons can sometimes enact very magical feats by their mystic power, but in the presence of the Sudarshan chakra, when it is let loose by the Lord, all such magical jugglery is dispersed. Again, Prabhupada's just incredible usage of magical jugglery. Magical feats by their mystic power. The instance of the quarrel between Durvasa Muni and Maharaj Ambarish is a practical example in this matter. Durvasa wanted to display many magical wonders, but when the Sudarshan Chakra appeared, Durvasa himself was afraid and fled to various planets for his personal protection. So this is a Prabhupada just being a Vaishnav, a typical pure Vaishnav. As he reads these pastimes, he remembers other pastimes which were parallel. And so Durvasa Muni got angry at Maharaj Ambarish. Maharaj Ambarish, in the Kartik month, in Mathura, was performing Ekadasi Brat. And Ekadasi Brat properly performed means you fast the day before Ekadasi, you fast on Ekadasi, and you fast the day after Ekadasi. It's a 3-day fast. You have to break fast on Dvadasi in a very slight way. You have to fast and eat only anukalpa. You have to eat only like mulpa, like fruits and roots, the day before, because you're not supposed to pass urine or stool on Ekadasi day. So you fast from food and water and sleep. You don't pass water or stool on Ekadasi day, which means you have to eat super light the day before, anukalpa, and then you evacuate. And on Ekadasi day, you're completely fixed in spiritual activities. And on Dvadasi, you take a ceremonial bath and break your fast. So he did this for a year with his wife. He was a king, but he did this in Mathura. In Kartik, he was finishing his brat. Durvasa Muni came, wanted to eat, but wanted to go bathe in the Yamuna first. You're supposed to wait till your guest eats. Maharaj Ambarish was in trouble because there was only one muhurta left for a short period of time, about 45 minutes, to break his fast. He consulted the Brahmanas, decided, I'll drink a little water, that way I'm still fasting. Durvasa came back, said, you drank water, got angry, plucked the hair from his head, turned into a demon. That demon tried to attack Maharaj Ambarish, but the Sudarshan just showed up on the spot. It had already been given to Maharaj Ambarish because he was such a sadhu that he never bothered to protect himself. And so the Sudarshan was there just to kind of rule his kingdom on his behalf. The Sudarshan then chased Durvasa Muni all over the universe. Shiva couldn't protect him, even though he was a devotee of Shiva. He finally went to Vaikuntha. Vishnu said, I can't protect you. Go and ask Ambarish Maharaj. He went back down to the material world, asked Ambarish Maharaj. Ambarish Maharaj said, I'm like really sorry. He prayed to Sudarshan, please don't hurt Durvasa Muni. And that's the pastime. And so Prabhupada was naturally reminded of that. And he calls it many magical wonders. which is a great way of kind of referring to Durvasa Muni's, what he did. And then Prabhupada moves forward. The Lord is described here as tree pot. And one point I want to communicate was that Prabhupada is always looking at the verses and being inspired in them by various ways, even if he breaks from directly commentating just on that verse and starts to go back out and jump different places. Something in the verse got him going and thinking and inspiring him. And our first job as his followers, when we read his commentary, is to try to deduce what it was that was inspiring him, what he was thinking about, and we should learn to think like Srila Prabhupada did so we can appreciate his commentary. And we can give our own commentary sometimes, but first thing we have to do is honor Prabhupada's commentary, and that means deducing how it derives from the verse. The Lord is here described as Tripat, which means that he is the enjoyer of three kinds of sacrifices. So that's the meaning of Tripat. It means three-legged. So he's three-legged. He has 3 feet. And so it means he's the enjoyer of three kinds of sacrifices. In Bhagavad Gita, the Lord confirms that he is the beneficiary and enjoyer of all sacrifices, penances, and austerities. That's a famous verse, Prabhupada called the peace formula. Bhoktaram yagatapasam sarvaloka maheshwaram suhridam sarvabhutanam gyatvam shantim richati. Devotees in the late 60s were protesting the Vietnam War. They would go out to where the protests were occurring at the UN in New York City, and they would pass out a pamphlet that said the peace formula and gave this verse. Because it says, Shantim Richati, you attain peace if you know these things about God. And so they were smart, they were clever. So they went to a war protest, which was very popular at the time. They brought a tract that said the peace formula, that they had mimeographed, pre-copy machines. And then they passed them out to try to attract people to what they were doing on the plea of also engaging in the protest. You follow? Super slick, super smart. So anyway, it says the Lord is the Bhoktaram, the enjoyer, Yagya Tapasam of all yagyas. So Prabhupada's viewing that to try to give some discussion of Tripat. The Lord is the enjoyer of 3 kinds of yagya. This is problematic because it's hard to find what is meant by he's the enjoyer of 3 kinds of yagya. I even looked at Vishwanath's commentary, and yeah, he said it's tapa, shocham, and daya. The Lord has 3 legs of dharma. He's a personification of sacrifices, and so austerity, cleanliness, and mercy are his 3 legs, leaving out satyam, truthfulness, which is kind of like always there. And so it's the 3 additional legs, which are sometimes lost, like in the Kali Yuga. He mentions that. He also quotes a verse from the Rig Veda, asya tritiya pada, that of these 3 types. I looked at the Rig Vedic verse, and it kind of doesn't give you anything. It's very, very enigmatic, and he doesn't give any commentary on it. Prabhupada says the Lord is the enjoyer of 3 kinds of yagya. So I had no idea where Prabhupada was going to go with this, because now I kind of thought about it. It could be havisha, which is where you offer a gruel of grains and beans, soma, and ghee, which are 3 items offered in sacrifice. But this like tree yagya and what's meant by this, I couldn't find it in any commentary. Prabhupada continues. As further described in Bhagavad Gita, there are sacrifices of goods, sacrifices of meditation, and sacrifices of philosophical speculation. So when he first said sacrifices of goods, I thought of the 4th chapter where he says there's Dravya Maya Yagya, but better than that is Jnana Yagya. But that's 2 sacrifices. The sacrifice in knowledge and the sacrifice just of goods. That's a physical sacrifice and a mental sacrifice. That's only 2, it doesn't get you 3. But Prabhupada clarifies where he's going here. He's going to karma, jnana, and yoga, which is mentioned in the Gita. There is a verse in the Gita. You can do it dhyanena, sankhya, karmena. By dhyana, yoga, by sankhya, and by karma. There's a verse in the 13th chapter which mentions this. And so it mentions karma, jnana, and bhakti. But there's a very well-known trope in our tradition. It's not mentioned it's a yagya per se, but it's a very well-known idea that bhakti is above karma, yoga, and jnana. So Prabhupada appears to be interpreting the verse like that. Those on the paths of jnana, karma, and yoga all have to come in the end of the Supreme Lord, because Vasudevam Sarvamiti, the Supreme Lord is the ultimate enjoyer of everything. That's the perfection of all sacrifice. And so I think Vasudeva Sarvamiti is, it's in the 7th chapter of the Gita, it's mentioned there's 4 kinds of people who surrender to Krishna. That's 4, it's not 3. And eventually they realize, after many births, Vasudeva Sarvamiti, Vasudeva is the Lord of all. And so even that's 4, not 3. I think what was happening here was Prabhupada was inspired by the verse. He was quoting multiple verses from the Gita. He was himself giving his own take on Tripat, which was original, which is not there in any preceding tradition. And he was just flowing with some verses from the Gita. He kind of referenced a few different things and made a little argument for a new novel interpretation of Tripat. And just like our acharyas do. It's like relatively enigmatic. There's no definitive purport which explains it. Different acharyas kind of interpret it in different ways. Most of those are novel interpretations by them. It's a fairly like sparsely used word. I could hardly find it used anywhere. And so Prabhupada gave his own novel interpretation and referenced the Gita for some support. Commentary or discussion? Thoughts? I'm 2 minutes over. 7 verses, 3 purports. Any final thoughts? Discussion? Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai.